Welcome in to Go Big or Go Home, everyone. This is Old Man Troy, joined by the marvelous youngster Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Chip Cunny on Twitter. What's shaking, my friend?
Not too much. It's very weird that we are doing this show. I will say this. Very weird that we're doing this show at this time of day. This never happens. And it's also our fourth Big Ten basketball preview show. And we are cutting this into, I believe, two different segments. We're hopefully going to cover the bottom half of the Big Ten basketball teams as far as the standings went last year. We're going to start from the bottom and go up, and we plan on getting through the first 7 teams today during this segment, and then the next 7 probably during another segment. But we'll see how it goes. You know, again, time constraints due to work, but it's very weird doing a show.
Do your work. Yeah. I'm enjoying a week off.
There you go. Vacation time.
Yeah, it's not really a vacation. It's just kind of a time off. It's a little relaxing time. I got some stuff to do around the house. Wife's going to make me do some stuff, rearrange a bedroom, rearrange a living room to get ready for Christmas. Nothing major, but, man, some time off. I don't have to worry about work, so that's a good thing. Like you said, youngster, 4th Big Ten preview show. The time has flown over the last 4 years. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
All right.
I remember when we started this show, and you were calling me, and I was talking to you about starting this Big Ten show, just in general, year-round, you know, 1 show a week. Obviously, do more shows if we need to, you know, March Madness type stuff, then we'll get a little more busy. But, yeah, I remember this, you know, basically phone call 4 years ago around this time. And we started shows, I believe, in January 4 years ago. So, yeah, I remember talking to you when I was in Orlando, and it seems like forever ago. But we have kept this show alive and doing it basically literally every single week, you know. Maybe once a year, twice a year, we'll miss a week due to whatever. But I think we have done well over the last 4 years. So,
yeah, we got a few loyal listeners out there. It shows. We know who listens, who doesn't. Well, we don't know who doesn't listen, but yeah, we get our fair share of listeners in, don't we? But it should be a good show today, youngster. Starting off our 4th Big Ten preview. It's going to be interesting. I mean, as we know, and I'll air quote, the cupcake schedule has started. There's a couple of good games in there, but for the most part, November, December basketball until around Christmas time, it really is padding your schedule, and we know why teams do it. I mean, there's 2 reasons. One, you got to get your team ready. You got to find your rotation. You got to find out who are going to be your key contributors, and sometimes you just got to have those so-called exhibition-type games. And the second reason, which is the big reason, is you got to get the wins. You need wins to get into the NCAA tournament, especially Big Ten teams. We talked about this for the last 3 years, is you have a couple teams maybe at the top that are like locks, that are just elite teams. This year, maybe not so many, but over the course of the 3 years, that top group has usually included 2-3 teams that could make a run at a national championship. Then you have a middle tier, and those are the teams that probably NCAA tournament teams could beat those elite teams on any given night. And then you got your bottom tier, the teams that are fighting maybe for an NIT berth, your wonderful CIT that you like to talk about, which is a wonderful tournament. But my point is, you get teams 3 through 10 that just beat each other up. And you figure if you play each other twice, you go 1-1. I mean, that's a lot of 1-1s. That's a 500 record. Your resume is not going to look great for the selection committee if you're playing in the Big Ten. A 500 Big Ten record is usually good enough to get you in the NCAA tournament if you have a non-conference schedule where you go 7 and now they're up to 20 games. So, 5-3 in the non-conference, 6-1 in the non-conference. So if you're scheduling top 50 teams in the non-conference, it's really going to hurt you come Big Ten play time, because even if you go 500 and you're 500 in your non-conference, now it's tough to get in. So I understand why they play the cupcakes. I'm just not a fan. I mean, I follow it a little bit. I'm a Badger fan. I'm a Big Ten fan. I watch the scores, but I'm not sitting down watching TV when there's some of these cupcake games on. So we'll move into it, though, youngster.
Yeah, sounds good. So with the Big Ten, you mentioned like last year, as far as making the NCAA tournament, there were, let me see here. I've got it. There were 8 teams a year ago that set a record. Minnesota, Ohio State were on the bottom of the Big Ten as far as teams that made the tournament and how they did in the Big Ten. Like Ohio State made the NCAA tournament last year, and they went 8-12 in Big Ten play. Part of that is because their overall record, they won 20 games. That's typically, there are extreme scenarios where teams don't win 20 games and get into the NCAA tournament, but it's very rare. It's very rare. So, again, these teams do have to kind of pad their stats, so to say, as far as their schedule goes in this non-conference schedule and the cupcakes. There are 2 Big Ten games that take place as far as conference games, in-conference games, before January, before the new year starts. That happens in December at some point. But outside of that, it is cupcakes. And like you said, with 20 conference games now, you're talking about 8, 9, maybe 10 non-conference games in there. I think 10 is too many. But yeah, some of these teams cupcake up, so to say, and some of them, like Michigan State, will play Duke, and they play in that Champions Classic, and all. Well,
you got the ACC challenge too, which right. I told you I really enjoy, and I'm glad that the Big Ten and ACC do that every year. And it's all based on. It's not all based on, but a lot of it's based on where you finished last year in the conference. They're going to try to pit you against another team of the same skill level. They're not going to put a Duke up against a Rutgers in the ACC challenge. We'll never see that game, but you're going to see teams that are relatively even in skill set, which I really enjoy. I mean, I know a lot of people put on like, oh, the ACC won this 8-4, blah blah blah. I don't really care about that. I just care about the good basketball that's playing. Like you could see you got Pittsburgh in a rebuilding year or in a rebuilding stage with Capel coming in. And so a Pitt versus Rutgers game might be something that you see. And that's okay. Right. Pitt's rebuilding right now. Eventually, and you and I both have talked about Capel, and I know this is a Big Ten show, but it kind of relates. So you got Pitt in the ACC rebuilding right now, and maybe the next year or two they're playing a Rutgers, or a Wake Forest, or a team that is in that bottom tier of the ACC. Eventually, I think Pitt will get into that middle tier of the ACC. I really believe that. It's just going to take time. And as that goes on, my point to this is that you see the games change. The level of competition in that ACC Big Ten Challenge will change. They're not always stuck going to be playing Rutgers. And I'm just throwing that out hypothetically. Eventually, it'll change because it's based on what those conferences believe will be good games. And that's why I love that ACC challenge. It's wonderful, my friend.
Yeah, I agree. Any of these teams that play anybody at any point during the non-conference, I enjoy it. It's more of a, hey, let's see where we're at. Let's see what we can do against another decent or good or amazing team. So, I think it's interesting. Not all these games matter for some of these teams, but at the same time, you can make the argument that even if you're Michigan State and you lose one game too many, that may cost you a 1 seed, and for some people that means a lot. And depending on how the matchups play out, it can mean everything. Instead of playing 8 or 9 seed that you match up favorably against, you could play a 7 or 10 seed in the second round that absolutely sucks as far as how your team matches up, and vice versa. It's not always better to have a 1 seed instead of a 2, because based on matchups, again, you could have that nightmare 8-9 team in the second round. Just say they play an amazing 2-3 zone and you have a hard time beating a zone. It all comes down to matchups. Typically, obviously, you'd rather have a higher seed, but it does come down to matchups at the end of the day, and what teams are hot and what teams are healthy, and there's a ton that goes into it. But as far as a 30-game season goes, you can, make the case that not every game means absolutely everything. And so, to schedule a couple good opponents, I like to see it, whether it results in losses or not. But let's go.
Let's move on. Let's get on. We got about 30 minutes to get through some teams here. So let's start right at the bottom, my friend. Let's go.
One thing I wanted to mention, at the other podcast we did for just general college basketball talk and introducing the year, I just wanted to update because we do this every week when we do talk about solely college basketball once football is truly over. Once we mainly shift over in January to basketball. Do you just want to mention the top 25 very quickly? Michigan State is still at 3. Maryland moved up from 7 to 6. Ohio State is climbing rapidly. They're up to 10. So they've been playing really good basketball. As far as other Big Ten teams, I think that might literally be it. I think there's only 3. Ohio State has surprised people just based on how they've been playing so far. They were supposed to be a higher-end, middle-tier Big Ten team coming into the year, but they've been cruising. They beat Villanova by like 30 the other night. That was impressive. But so anyway, getting to the bottom again, we're just going to be talking about the bottom 7 teams here, as long as we get through what we want to get through. So from last year's standings, and some of these teams again, talking about the bottom 7 teams. Let's see here, 3, 6. So yeah, we'll be talking about Ohio State today to end the show. And again, they made the NCAA tournament. And this was talking about the bottom 7 teams in the conference. So it goes to show how deep the Big Ten can be. And Indiana even finished with the same exact record. They just had 19 wins instead of 20. That was part of why they didn't make the NCAA tournament. But so finally, starting at the bottom here, Northwestern a year ago was 4-16 in conference play. They were 13-19. That was the worst overall record as well in the Big Ten. And with Northwestern, Chris Collins, I do like him as a coach. And a couple years ago, they made that run actually to the NCAA tournament for the first time in forever. First time ever, realistically, program history. So they did big things a couple years ago. They lost a bunch of guys, and last year it showed. This year, it's really, truly, honestly, more of the same. This team could very well be the worst team in the Big Ten again. Their top 3 guys, even from last year, left. So this team, to give some context, they're very young. A.J. Turner is probably the top player. He averaged 8.7 points per game last year. So again, I really honestly don't have a ton. We could talk 20 minutes about every single one of these teams, but based on what you as the fans want to hear about, you don't want to hear Northwestern for 20 minutes, most likely, unless you're a Northwestern fan, and in which case this podcast just very, vanilla as far as going over, one team. We're not going to go insanely in depth on every one of these teams. And for Northwestern, again, they are supposed to be at the bottom of the Big Ten. They lost a lot of guys 2 years ago. They lost their top 3 guys, arguably, last year, coming into this year. So, this team right now is not it's not good. And it could very well be, again, the worst team in the Big Ten. So I'll shift it back to you, Troy, if you've got, whatever you want to talk about.
Well, Northwestern, this is the type of school, we all know the academics at Northwestern, so recruiting can be a little more difficult at Northwestern. But you got to look at this program as one where they're going to have their hills and valleys. And that's typical of a school that is not a power. You look at a Purdue, a Michigan State. They're bringing in, top 20, top 30 recruiting classes, if not higher, every year. A Northwestern has got to bring in a really good recruiting class, have those guys stay together for 4 years because they're not going to get a lot of one and dones. They're not going to get a lot of 4 or 5 star recruits. They're going to get a few sprinkled in there. My point to this is Northwestern program is built on team unity, building guys, getting them to flow through the system year by year by year, and then they're going to have a 2, 3, maybe a 4-year run where they're pretty good. They're pretty competitive. Then when those guys are gone, Then they're going to start going down the hill a little bit. They've got to go out and recruit these guys, get them in the system, have the young guys play together, get better, keep adding guys. Then they're going to go up the hill a little bit. Then when those guys are gone, the cycle continues. That's Northwestern basketball. That's what you have to look at when you're looking at a program like Northwestern. And that's just reality. And right now they're in that stage where they've got to bring in a few recruiting classes. They got to get some guys to play together. You know, they don't send a ton of guys to the NBA. Well, and I should be fair about that. It's hard to get into the NBA first. So a lot of programs don't send a lot of guys to the NBA. But Northwestern, my point there is you don't have that dominant guy where you're watching Northwestern saying, hey, you know what, that kid, he's going to the NBA. That kid, he's going to the NBA. My point, Northwestern, is just you got to be patient, and you got to take your runs when they come, and then you got to take your down years like this year, probably next year, and then watch the progression where they get to the middle of the pack. And that's just the way that program works. And, you know, even though they're going to be at the bottom of the pile, and I'll start to show it this way, you got to be ready to play. It doesn't matter if you're Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio State. You go to Northwestern, you better be ready to play. Because on the old cliche, any given day, another team can beat you. You have an off shooting night, you're at Northwestern, all of a sudden, boom, bottom dweller Northwestern knocks off Wisconsin. It could happen.
Yeah, they won 4 games a year ago. And, 4-16 is obviously an atrocious record, but they still won 4 games. It's not Rutgers football where you're going to go 0-9 in the Big Ten, Big Ten football season. This team has a chance to beat. We even saw last year, like Illinois get a little hot, and they were the 4th worst, quote unquote, Big Ten team just in terms of where they finished in the standings, and they beat Michigan State at one point. And Michigan State was supposed to be the top dog. I don't remember what other wins they had. They had 6 other ones, but they may have beaten Purdue as well. I don't remember. I'd have to check. But this team, like you're saying, Troy, just whether it's literally the bottom team on the conference, they can still pull off 3, 4, 5, 6 wins. Nebraska is the next team we'll talk about. That's the second to bottom team last year in the standings. They still had 6 wins. I mean,
that's a great prelude. Carry on to Nebraska. I have nothing else for Northwestern.
Very quickly, they're as far as the top 5 minute getters so far, and they've only played 2 games. They actually beat Providence. I'll say that this is not supposed to be a good Providence team this year, but it is a basketball team that that people have heard of, obviously. But so their top 5 guys getting minutes right now are not Turner. He's actually the 6th guy. He's the top point getter from a year ago that they returned, but their top guy right now is a sophomore averaging 14 and 10. Pete Nance, he's like 6'9", 6'10", as a big. So he's a sophomore. He will be there for most likely another couple of years, like you're saying. Very hard to get into the NBA in general, let alone to see a Northwestern guy go is basically unheard of. So he's a sophomore. They got 1 senior getting top minutes. They got 1 junior getting top minutes, and then they got a couple freshmen. Under Nance as a sophomore, getting top 5 minutes. So, again, the bulk of this team is young. And all of them, as far as the top 6 guys anyway, will be back, and it could be 7, 8, outside of the 1 starting senior they have. So, again, hills and valleys, and this is just a young team right now. But, in any case, we will move on to Nebraska. And, again, Nebraska went 6-14 a year ago in conference, 19-17 overall. So just to give a little perspective that, this team won more games than they lost, and I know there's cupcakes out there, but this team was 1 win away from getting 20. And they were the second from the bottom in the Big Ten standings a year ago. Again, they went 6-14. So, you win 1, you lose 2. You win 1, you lose 2. That was basically them a year ago in the Big Ten, just in the Big Ten. So, again, you have to come ready to play, even if it's the second worst team, quote unquote, in the Big Ten. Now, you can obviously make the argument they were better than Rutgers. I would say they were. But in any case, Nebraska a year ago, they were supposed to make noise. They had a lot of veterans on that team, and they just did not perform up to expectations in conference play. So Tim Miles was the head coach a year ago. done. Fred Hoiberg is in. This team, unfortunately, because of all of the older guys they had a year ago, all those guys left, and you have a new head coach, and so he's brought in a couple transfers. Fred Hoiberg always does that, no matter what program he's at. He did that beautifully at Iowa State, and then he left for the Bulls, and that didn't work out partially because it's the Bulls, and you need stars to win in the NBA. So either you're taking a very average group in the NBA and you're getting to the playoffs and then getting killed in the first round, or you have stars and you're actually doing some damage. That's just kind of the way it works in the NBA. Or you just have a bad team and you have no chance whatsoever. But in any case, he is at Nebraska now, and I loved him in college. As far as being a college coach, we talked about that on the other podcast we had, so I'm not going to get too in-depth on that. But I think this hire was phenomenal for Nebraska. They've got 13 new scholarship players. Two guys did transfer, one from Tennessee, one from Western Kentucky, that have to sit out this year so that they can, play next year. You have to sit out typically if you transfer in that first year. Recruiting-wise, they have a guy that started at Marquette, actually, Hanif Cheatham. Troy, I know you're familiar with Marquette basketball, Wisconsin basketball. You're a Wisconsin guy. I like Marquette basketball personally. I didn't even know he was at Nebraska right now, but he's a talented piece. He actually transferred to Florida Gulf Coast after Marquette, and now he transferred from Florida Gulf Coast to here. They got the number 2 JUCO recruit in the country, who's now in his first year at Nebraska. They got the number 3 JUCO recruit. Both of those guys are guards. So now he's at Nebraska as well. The only returning Nebraska player from a year ago that got any minutes whatsoever, there is one player is back from a year ago that actually got minutes on last year's team. And his nickname is Thor because his last name consists of, 4, 8, 12, 14 letters. So I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but looks Swedish, I guess, if I had to.
He's got a last name like mine, doesn't he?
Yeah, something like that. Thor,
a lot of vowels and a lot of consonants all put together into a string for some reason, right?
Yeah, people call him Thor, so that works for me. But point being, this team lost a ton, and they have one guy that got minutes a year ago. They're bringing in JUCOs, they're bringing in transfers. That's what Hoiberg does. Obviously, he can recruit, pure freshmen as well. But this team will also be on the bottom of the Big Ten with Northwestern. This will be a bottom 4 team. And just this year, let me take a look. I know they started 0-2.
They're 1-2 right now, my friend.
Yeah, they're 1-2. There you go. So they beat South Dakota State.
Vacation thing because I can actually have access to statistics. And I can actually have access to talking points, unlike the normal way we do this show. And again, you look at their schedule, Kevin. It is purely cupcake. I mean, they got Creighton and Georgia Tech. They got thrown in there, and then they start Big Ten play with Indiana and Purdue. So, but again, Hoiberg's going to do his thing. You got to give the new coach some time. It's going to be a little frustrating if you're a Nebraska fan. But what you're looking for, again, like with Northwestern, is progression. But they've got a coach that has been there and done it at the college level. I don't fault him for going to the NBA and coming back to college quickly, as we mentioned on the other show that we do. Some guys are just meant to coach in college. That's where Hoiberg is. He's a college coach, in my mind. I think he's just one of those guys that can come and he can get it done, and he does a good job, and the guys rally around him. Give him 2 years. And this team will be a team that, maybe they'll find lightning in a bottle one year if he gets those JUCO guys that he can always get, and maybe they're at the top of the Big Ten. But I look at Nebraska to eventually, under Hoiberg, Kevin, be a team that can contend year in and year out to get into the NCAA tournament. That's how much I think of him. He can get that program to a consistent NCAA tournament team, and he'll do it. It just will take time. That's all I got on Nebraska. So when you're done, you can move forward.
Sounds good. Very little to add. They're the top JUCO guy that they got. He's their top minute getter right now, averaging 16, 6, and 6, showing that he can do a lot of different things. in Cam Mack, and then Gervais Green is the other JUCO guy. He's actually second in minutes. So both of those, the two top JUCO guys they got coming into this year. But so yeah, to me personally, this is how I'll end Nebraska talk. I don't know if he's the 10th best coach in college basketball, but to say that he is a top 10 coach in college basketball, I wouldn't scoff at that at all. There are obvious names, I won't list them, that make up the top 5, 6, 7, 8. But after that elite group of guys in college basketball that coach, I think Hoiberg is right on the doorstep from those coaches. And some of those coaches, to be honest, X's and O's wise, you can say Hoiberg, is better than them, but they may recruit better. But to me, to call him a top 10 coach in college basketball is not insane. And I would be willing to vouch for him. That's how much I like him. So Nebraska is not a traditional, basketball powerhouse, but I'm with you in thinking, Troy, that he can make this team a 4 out of every 5 years make the NCAA tournament type of program.
Well, I think it's just in the way he recruits, though. Like you said, he's not afraid to go out and get the JUCO guys. And if you start having some success and you're playing in the NCAA tournament every year, it's easier to attract those JUCO guys. Right. I know how much, and I know in lieu of time, I'm looking at the time, we've still got a number of teams to get through and quickly. When I coached college soccer, Kevin, going after JUCO guys when I first took over and that my program was terrible, it was hard. You're not getting a quality JUCO guy. You're getting a guy who needs a home, has nowhere else to go, and you bring a guy in, and maybe you get lucky. As I put together a plan and showed my recruits coming in, my young guys, then I could go to these JUCO tournaments, these junior colleges, and say, hey, look what I'm building. I need some leadership. I need some guys that can step in here and play with these young guys. It takes time. You just don't walk in and all of a sudden grab, great JUCO players. Now, Hoiberg has a name. He's got a plan. He's getting those guys. Just wait till he gets that team winning. The JUCO coaches will be calling him, say, hey, take a look at this guy. And that's where I got to, where I had those coaches calling me, saying, hey, I got a couple players I think that'll fit in your program. That's where that's where he's going to get to. And I'm not going to say he's going to have the pick of the litter, but he's going to have some good JUCO guys to come in and play. So we can move on.
Yeah, they got 2 of the top 3 JUCO guys in his first, going into his first year. So he can bring in guys from outside places, whether it's JUCOs or transfers for sure. So moving on to Rutgers, they were 3rd from the bottom. They were 7-13. So again, 1 win more than Nebraska. That's why we're talking about them here. 14-17 overall. That was they had a better record overall than Northwestern, better than Illinois, better than Penn State technically by half a game. But so Rutgers, again, 7 Big Ten wins a year ago. Troy was pushing for NIT, and I remember I was talking about CIT, and then I think I looked more into it. And I think it's the non-power whatever conferences, you can call them Power 5 conferences in college basketball. There's more than that, realistically, in college basketball. But the teams that I think win their regular season, but not the postseason tournament, I think those are the teams that get first dibs or the only teams that qualify for the CIT. I think it's like a 16-team tournament.
Bottom line, you got to be 500, my friend. Bottom line, you got to be 500.
Yeah. So I don't think Rutgers can technically make the CIT based on how that works. But again, you have, like Troy said, you have to be 500 to make the NIT. That's ultimately your goal is to at least make the NIT, and then you can build, I think, your program from there. If you're starting at a place like Rutgers, so I think this team this year again will, not be great. I don't see a ton of improvement only because their best player a year ago transferred to Oregon. So he's at Oregon now. And that was the one player that truly, you could easily say had talent from a year ago. Omaruyi was his last name. But so Geo Baker, a senior guard, probably going to be your top player this year. Through, 4 games now? They're 3-1. They just lost to St. Bonaventure by 6. St. Bonaventure occasionally makes the NCAA tournament. They haven't beaten great teams. They've beaten all teams that I've heard of, Bryant, Niagara, Drexel. But at the end of the day, it comes down to Big Ten play and what you can do there. But there is something to be said for beating teams that at least I have heard of. Stephen F. Austin I've heard of. I don't know. New Jersey.
They play tomorrow.
INT, yeah. Play Stephen F. Austin tomorrow. That's on Wednesday.
Look down the schedule, too, youngster. I was just hypothetically saying they play Pitt.
Yeah. Right.
So,
they play Pitt.
Well, I got a little I got a little psychic power, I guess.
I guess so. But yeah, that'll be an interesting game to see. I think Rutgers is fine. They're not going to be atrocious, but again, losing your top player from a year ago, who should have been back, is probably frustrating as a Rutgers fan, as a Rutgers coach. You probably didn't want to see him transfer away. So that sucks, realistically, if you're a Scarlet Knights fan. They also play Seton Hall in the non-conference. That's going to be a joy. I saw them play Michigan State, I think it was. It was Michigan State. That game was phenomenal. Seton Hall is really, really good. They could have easily beaten Michigan State. But in any case, this Rutgers team, what else do I have here as far as notes? They last made the NIT in 2006. That was their last winning season, just to give some perspective on where Rutgers basketball has been the last 12 years. Not in the NIT, no winning season. So they were close a year ago, again, 14-17. And if their top guy returned, maybe they would have, eclipsed that 500 mark. But I'm a bit leery. They've got some guys who have talent and can play basketball. I'll give Steve Picciol, the head coach, that. This is not
what it's going to come down to, youngster, with Rutgers is they've just got to, in that bottom tier, if they want to make the postseason. I mean, you and I both know this is not an NCAA tournament team. But right. I've been on Rutgers bandwagon for 3 years now, trying to get them into the NIT. I mean, not me personally lobbying for them, but I've been on their bandwagon cheering for them, like, hey, let's go NIT, right? So if they want any chance at that, what they've got to do is they've got to separate themselves from this bottom tier of 4 or 5 teams. And they've got to be the best of those 4 or 5 teams. And they've got to take care of business down there. The problem is you got teams like a Northwestern that can beat Rutgers on any given night. You got a Nebraska team that is going to be good, has some JUCO guys that are in that can beat Rutgers on any given night. So to make the NIT, they've got to be the best of the bottom tier, and that's just hard. There's a lot of – I mean, I shouldn't say there's a lot of good teams in that bottom tier, but there's a lot of competitive teams in that bottom tier. And you're probably not going to go, for example, if the bottom tier consists of 5 teams, that would leave 9 teams that are so-called competitive postseason teams, right? And that's fair for the Big Ten. So the 5 that are down there, that leaves 4 others in that tier. That's probably – you don't play everyone twice, maybe 6 games in that bottom tier. You've got to go 6-0 if you're Rutgers to make the NIT, because that'll propel you into the top 9. And get you out of that bottom tier. And that's just hard to do. It doesn't matter if you're Rutgers, Northwestern, Nebraska. But to get out of that bottom tier, you've got to beat every other team in that bottom tier. It's just too hard. It's just too hard. So that's all I got on Rutgers.
Yeah. Last thing for me, they're not super young either. That's, again, if their best player came back, you could make the argument for, hey, 15-15, 16-14, 17-13. Let's try and get to the NIT. But I'm just worried for Rutgers, I guess. Unfortunately, that's just
all right. Move on, my friend. We've got a time constraint, and the old man keeps babbling. So continue.
Got like 15 minutes left until I have to log in to work. That's how I work. But yeah. So Illinois. Illinois was 7-13 as well as Rutgers a year ago. 12-21 was their overall record. That would be the worst in the Big Ten, just as far as overall record is concerned. If you play good teams, though, and I think that was the case a year ago, was their non-conference schedule was loaded. I would have to check, but I believe that was the team. There was one team near the bottom of the Big Ten that had their non-conference schedule just loaded, and Illinois was one of them. They were that team, I believe. That led to a terrible, overall record. But again, 7-13 in Big Ten play. They strung a few wins. I know they beat Michigan State, like I mentioned before. This team is my They're not my favorite to win it. They're not my, whatever. But I am absolutely pulling for this team to make the NCAA tournament. This is the team I'm throwing my, rooting hat for in the Big Ten on. Again, it's easy to watch Michigan State and say, yeah, that's a fun team. That's, root for Michigan State to do well, obviously. But Illinois, to me, is that one team that from the middle of the pack down, that's the one team I'm gravitating toward. This team basically returns everybody from a year ago. Ayo Dosunmu is one of the guards. Trent Frazier is the other. Dosunmu could have been in the NBA a year ago. He was a freshman a year ago. He's a sophomore this year. He could have been picked in the NBA draft. Decided to come back, probably, hopefully, to make himself a first-rounder. Some thought he may have been, but it was kind of, leery. Would you go, back end of the first round? Would you go in the second round? So he came back. But those two guards, Frazier's a good one, too. He can shoot from deep. Those two guards leading the way with Brad Underwood as the head coach. He likes guards. He likes going up tempo. He was a former Oklahoma State coach. That's what he likes to do. He likes to get up and down the court. He likes to shoot. So he's got the guards to do it, for sure, in Frazier and Dosunmu. So those two are good. Bezanishvili, I believe, 6'9" forward, scored 35 in a game last year. He's back. They brought in a 7-footer as a freshman in Cockburn. This team has size. They have talented 6'9" players. They have an NBA guard. They have a guard that can shoot. This team has depth. They return everyone basically from a year ago. So I really, truly, honestly think this is an NCAA tournament team.
And they're off to a good start. Their schedule is not as demanding as last year.
Right. The only thing that not concerned me, but I was very curious to see how they would do against Arizona, and they lost by 21 points. And this Arizona team is not absolutely loaded and, ready for a Final Four. They were ranked 21st in the country at the time. So Arizona's good, obviously. And I thought Illinois could compete and make it an interesting game, and they lost by 21 points. So that was, again, put whatever word you want in there. But like you said, as far as non-conference stuff, they play, I don't even know who NCAT is, but Missouri, they should be fine there. Old Dominion, heard of, should get a win there. Miami, that'll be a good game. They play Maryland. That's obviously a Big Ten game. I don't know what I'm talking about there. I was thinking ACC for the ACC challenge, but obviously Maryland is in the Big Ten now. LBI, don't know. Hampton, CIT. So this team's got winnable games. And then they're going to go into the Big Ten, with a decent record. And, they already played their hardest non-conference game in Arizona, to me. So this team could go in with 1 or 2 losses going into Big Ten play. They play Maryland and Michigan in December, so to start off.
Yeah, they could be 0-2. They could be 0-2 going into the meat of the schedule, but it could be. Again, I talked about it to start the show. Sometimes it's really a catch-22, and it's a double-edged sword. You want to play the good teams to get your RPI up and be good, but if you're not ready to play that good RPI schedule, it's going to be a detriment when you get to the end of the year. So where Illinois is at, I look at their schedule, pile up some wins. This is a team that is going to be in the middle of the pack. Like you said, you're going to be rooting for them to get to the NCAA tournament. What they have to do is they have to ride the ship in the middle of the tier in the Big Ten. And what I mean by that is take care of teams below you, lesser talented teams like a Rutgers, a Nebraska, a Northwestern. Those are games you have to win. And then you need to pull off a few key upsets at the top of the conference. Maybe beat a Wisconsin, maybe beat a Michigan, maybe, play tough against Maryland. Maryland's good. We'll talk about them on the next preview show. But they might need to pull off 2 or 3 of those upper-level wins, and then they've got to take care of business, the teams lower than them. So if they stay in the middle of the pack, Kevin, they very well could get that NCAA bid you want. That's all I got on Illinois.
Yeah. I think I'll move on from there, I believe. I don't think I have much else on them. Again, that's the one team I'm looking at for sure. They only go 8 deep. That was the other thing. I knew there was something else I wanted to mention. They only go 8 deep. That could be, you can say they bring everyone back from a year ago, but it looks like they're only playing 8 deep. and as far as minutes are concerned. So something to note is that they're not insanely deep, but they do have 8 players that can play. So anyway, moving on. Penn State is the next team. Last year, again, they went 7-13 in Big Ten play. They went 7-13. Illinois did. Rutgers did. Penn State overall 14-18. That's not going to get you into the NIT. But again, 7-13 a year ago. As far as what this team did at the end of last year, they won 7 of the last 10. They got hot toward the end. Lamar Stevens is absolutely the player to note. He's a first-team Big Ten player coming into this year. He was, he's very talented. One of the guys I liked from a year ago was a guard, Josh Reeves. They lost him, but they lost some other people too, not as talented as Reeves, but losing Reeves will hurt from a guard perspective for sure. But Stevens is back, and he is definitely the name to know from Penn State. Mike Watkins is another good forward they have. That's kind of the issue to me, though, is guard play, for sure. They've got Watkins, they've got Stevens. They'll be fine on the boards. They'll be fine, defending wings and bigs. But the guard play, to me, is going to be the key to look at for Penn State this season. And Pat Chambers, to me, he was hired in 2011, and he hasn't really done anything at Penn State. So to me, it's like, when are you going to do something or make a change? In my opinion.
Yeah, there's a kid early in the season here, Kevin, and again, you look at the schedule, but they did play Georgetown. Myron Jones is a guy that's putting some points in the bucket, and so it'll be interesting to watch this kid. But like you said, Lamar Stevens, he's the engine to the car. And if Lamar Stevens is playing hot and you can't stop him, and they've got that presence with Lamar, Penn State could pull off a couple of victories. I mean, I know Georgetown is not the dominant Georgetown of way back when I was growing up, the Patrick Ewing days, but it's still a win against a formidable program. And
they still won by 15 points. Nothing to scoff at.
And this is a team, like you said, got hot at the end of the year. They've got a coach that's been in there for a while, but like you said, this could be a year where he needs to, get this team close and at least give the fans hope. I mean, you want to be there in the middle of the pack, and with Lamar Stevens, you're going to need some other guys to step up. And what I've seen so far early, living in Western PA, I get to hear games on the radio. This Myron Jones kid seems to be maybe a guy that can take some of the pressure off Lamar Stevens. We'll see how he plays when it gets to a little tougher competition, though. I mean, you look at who they've played. I mean, I know Georgetown, but they're not that dominant Georgetown, like I said. And then you got Bucknell and Yale next. I mean, those are games you should win. And if we see L's on there when we start doing this show to Bucknell and Yale, then it's going to be a long year for Penn State. But they do have a great player in Lamar Stevens, so we'll see what happens with Penn State. That's all I got.
Sounds good. My computer is acting out currently, but next we have Indiana. And Indiana a year ago went 8-12, finally getting off that 7-13 thing. But so 8-12 Indiana a year ago. Archie Miller, his third year now. They're starting to get really good recruits. They're starting to bring in more bigs. That's the thing with Indiana to me, is that they've always had good guard play, and it takes getting a Cody Zeller type guy to say, or Tyler Zeller, whichever one it was, I think it was Cody, that, hey, we have actually a big presence here, and we can now do some damage because this team, again, always has good guards. But to me, it's up to Archie Miller to recruit bigs, and I think they are getting bigs now. Trace Jackson Davis, I should say. Mr. Basketball in Indiana, he was the number 30 overall recruit. He's a freshman on this year's team. They got a grad transfer who's from Butler. He's a big as well. He's, able to play immediately since he's a grad transfer. They've got other 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" guys. Justin Smith is a good forward. So this team's got capable bigs. They've got young talent. Rob Finney is a really good guard. Al Durham's a good guard. To this team, and again, I talked about how this team loves its guards, and offense typically is what you think of. But this team has been quoted as saying that they hang their hat on their defense. And that is very interesting to me because, again, it just goes away from the conventional thinking, at least from me, that Indiana in recent years has been run up and down the court with our guards, score a bunch, and they're still doing that against bad teams. They're 4-0 right now against bad teams. They scored 100 in the last game. But
they should be undefeated going into the ACC Challenge against Florida State.
Yeah.
I mean, they really should be. And that'll be a good game against Florida State. So this is a team, Kevin, that we could see that realistically starting the Big Ten Conference against Wisconsin could be undefeated going into Big Ten play. But and the thing is, you talk about it, and I think every team, and I know the new wave college basketball in the NBA is shoot it and shoot it a lot. Shoot it a lot. At the end of the day, though, when you look at it, you still need to have a formidable defense that can get a stop, that can shut down other teams. Because what if you're having an off shooting night? If you're just a run and gun team, it works. Back when I was growing up, everybody thought, Tark was a madman for UNLV and just running and shooting. And he got to a Final Four a couple of times. But in today's world, Kevin, I still believe good defense will help your offense. You can be fast-paced, you can be up-tempo, but you really have to commit to defense, especially in the Big Ten, in my mind, Kevin, because good defense will get you a couple extra possessions a game, and I think those are necessary, especially when you get to the NCAA tournament. Good defense, to me, can get you an extra 3-4 possessions if you win the turnover battle, and that will help you be successful in the Big Ten and in the NCAA tournament. I like this Indiana team. They really haven't played anybody yet. It'll be interesting to see when they start playing teams like Florida State, Wisconsin. I know they got UConn after Wisconsin. So it'll get tougher. But leading into that game against Florida State, this team should be undefeated. That's all I got.
Yeah. This is an NCAA tournament team to me. This year the thinking is that there's 2 automatics in Michigan State and Purdue. But as far as, not Purdue, Maryland. But so outside of those 2, it was kind of 3 through 11. You can, pick a name out of a hat and say, here's the number 3 team, here's the number 11 team. I think Ohio State has proven that they are much better than, hey, we might be 11th best in the conference. No, they've proven they're a top 25 worthy team. They're going to the NCAA tournament. I'd be shocked if they didn't, just based on what I've seen. So I think there are a ton of Big Ten teams that can make the NCAA tournament. That's what people are thinking coming into the year, and I don't think, that they are wrong on that thinking. I think Minnesota has struggled to this point. Nebraska, Purdue has been up and down. Northwestern is definitely going to be down. Rutgers is definitely going to be down. But outside of that bottom tier, any of these teams can make the NCAA tournament. I think Indiana, they should. Last team on today's show. The 7th worst team, again, made the NCAA tournament a year ago in Ohio State. And so talking about Ohio State a second ago, here we go. They were 20-15 overall, 8-12 in the Big Ten. They did make the NCAA tournament. They were an 11 seed. I think they won. I think, wasn't the Big Ten undefeated? Didn't all 8 teams make the second round, Troy, or was there one loser? I don't remember. But I thought all of them won or one lost.
You're trying to ask a guy pushing 50 years old to think back a year ago? Come on now. Where's your mind at?
My apologies.
You should know.
I should have it written down. That's what I should have had. But in any case, Ohio State, again, solid team a year ago, 8-12 in the Big Ten, but it goes to show how good the Big Ten was a year ago for them to get in with an 8-12 conference record. They did hit 20, and that's always the magical key. Just because you win 20 overall games doesn't mean you're in, but you have to at least win 20. That's the conventional thinking, and it played out last year as well. Anyway, Ohio State this year. Again,
did you before you continue? Did you log in? I know you have a work commitment.
Yes, I said hello. I said I've got a little radio thing going on, so I'll be, a couple minutes late. But me and my boss have a good relationship. I appreciate him accommodating my radio stuff. But so yes, I'm all set there. Thank you, Troy. Ohio State basketball this year, though. What was it? Number 10. That's what Villanova was ranked. They beat them by 25 points. They beat the number 10 team in the country, and again, you can say they're not number 10 anymore, whatever. But they beat Cincinnati to start the year, who's always an amazing defensive team. They won that game 64-56, which sounds about right for a Cincinnati basketball game. But this team is 4-0 so far. They're ranked number 10 in the country, rightfully so. I believe they started 16 in the preseason, but worked their way up with wins, and when you beat the number 10 team by 25 points, that gets people's eyebrows raising.
And they shouldn't lose again until they come up to that North Carolina game in the ACC Challenge.
Yeah, that's going to be a very, very good game. Then they play Penn State and Minnesota, which should be 2 wins. They also play Kentucky toward the end of December. So they've got some big boys in there in the non-conference. But this team will be, they should be anyway, a top 25 team going into the month of January and the bulk of the Big Ten schedule. But overall, as far as, what this team is, Chris Holtman's in his 3rd year. Once you're in your 3rd year, you're starting to get, a good bulk of your guys in there. And they've got a number of good players. Caleb Wesson, you can make the argument, is the best big in the Big Ten this year. I like Xavier Tillman a lot. I know you like Xavier Tillman a lot, Troy, from Michigan State. But Caleb Wesson he has shed plenty of weight since coming in, and it shows, and he is a dominant big, for sure. This team's got a number of good young guys. This team's got a number of good juniors and seniors. A couple of freshmen are already getting quality minutes. DJ Carton was part of the number 14 overall recruiting class. So this team, not going to be Duke, not going to be Kentucky, apparently Memphis as far as recruiting, but 14th best recruiting class this past year, so that are now freshmen. And this team also got a transfer, a point guard from Florida State a year ago, sat out, or 2 years ago, sat out last year. Now he can play, CJ Walker. This team they're deep, they're talented, they've got experience, they've got good young players. This, again, should be a top 25 team without question. And, seeing what they did to Villanova was very encouraging. But this team's got, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names off the bat that I recognize as good players. And that's not including another 4 that are averaging at least 10 minutes a game right now. So this team is deep as well, which only helps you going forward throughout a 30, 35 game season. So
yeah,
I like Ohio State.
All I want to add on Ohio State, and I know you got to run off and get to your job. All I want to say is you look at 4 games under 500. I guess 4 games, 8 and 12 in the Big Ten, moving to 20 games. Our concern last year, Kevin, was how is the committee going to look at teams such as an Ohio State that finish at an 8 and 12 or a 9 and 11 in a 20-game conference schedule? And we found out last year. Ohio State did play a non-conference schedule that had some big names on it, but to go 8 and 12, that gives hope in a 20-conference game schedule, because you and I did have our concerns. It used to be if you finished at 500 or above in the Big Ten, you were probably going to be considered for the NCAA tournament. And last year we're like, well, now there's 20 games. What if you are 9 and 11, 8 and 12? Will you get in and have a chance to get into the Big Ten tournament? Because one of the criteria prior to that was a 500 conference record. And It was nice to see that Ohio State at 8 and 12 got in the big dance. And it's one of those things that you and I are concerned going to a 20-game schedule. We loved it because of the competitive nature of the Big Ten, but our concern was, what is it going to do to some of these teams that finish below 500 in the Big Ten, such as the Ohio State? And we got our answer. And it's nice to see that the committee is not holding that, solid line, like you must be 500 in your conference to get into the NCAA tournament, because there's going to be a lot of conferences, the ACC following suit, and I'm assuming a lot of these larger power conferences, Kevin, will go to a 20-game regular season schedule. And I love it because I think that's where your competitive nature is. It knocks some of these cupcake games out of there, and you know how much I love those. But when I looked at Ohio State's schedule, Kevin, Stetson, UNL, Kent State, Morgan State, do they really need all of those games? I mean, they have them. But when I look across, you take a team that doesn't have a 20-game conference schedule and it's packed with 12 non-conference schedule games against teams, and I'm not knocking these lower teams, but the Kent States, the Morgan States, they've got to play the bigger names to get the paycheck for their school, for their athletic program. And they know they're probably going to lose, but they sign up for it because they want the paycheck. But in reality, is it really helping these better programs? My answer is no. You don't need that many cupcake games to figure out what's going on. I like the 20-game conference schedule. I think every power school should go to it. And my point here, Ohio State, a good team. Can't wait for the Carolina game. They should be undefeated against Carolina. That should be a really good ACC Big Ten Challenge game. And Ohio State, they're going to be a team maybe to be reckoned with as we move forward. So that's all I got on Ohio State. What else you got?
Yeah, I like them a lot in general. Like you said, North Carolina game is going to be awesome. But, yeah, the big point you made, just talking about the conference schedule, it's amazing a year ago this team, as a conference, the Big Ten, again, got 8 teams in the NCAA tournament. And that's a record for this conference. And 5 teams went above 500 in conference play. They were all very good teams. 4 were ranked. Maryland was just on the outside. They still won 23 games. But only 5 teams were above 500. Iowa was 500. They got in. Minnesota 9-11. They got in. Ohio State 8-12. They got in. Indiana was right on the bubble until the end. At 19-16 overall. I know they played a bunch of really good teams as well. It might have been Indiana that had a ton, and Illinois just had some, powers. It definitely was Indiana, now that I think about it. Now that I jog my memory back. Indiana had a really tough non-conference schedule, and it ended up killing them as far as not getting into the NCAA tournament. But sometimes that's the price you pay. I'm not going to fault Indiana for doing that. But so yeah, it's encouraging to see, and that's part of what the committee has to do is figure out, is this 8-12 team deserving of being in the NCAA tournament? If you're in the Big Ten and you go 8-12 and you got some quality wins in there and your losses make sense for the most part, you don't have 2-3 terrible losses, we'll throw you in and see what you can do. And I'm pretty sure they won their first round game a year ago, which can only help validate going forward that yes, an 8-12 Big Ten team can get into the dance and do something. So yes, you should, as a committee, look at these teams. So I think that only helped what this conference did a year ago. I commend the committee on that, because it is very easy to say 8-12. What are you doing? You barely won 20 games. You're out. And maybe a different year it would have been different. Maybe there would have been more at-large teams to fill those spots, and Ohio State would have got snubbed out. You don't know, but it was encouraging to see a year ago, and this year I'm sure it'll probably be the same. There will be a 9-11, 8-12 Big Ten team that has a quality resume, has 20 wins, and they get in.
And to piggyback off that, and I know that you're in a time constraint, but I just want to say the other thing that needs to happen for the Big Ten to put in multiple record-breaking teams, Kevin, is all of those automatic bids, conference tournament teams from the mid-majors. They have to fall into place. They can't have and I'm from Green Bay, so UWGB in the Horizon League, if they're the favorite and they have a 24-3 record, but they bow out in the final to an underdog that is 14-16, that 14-16 team took an automatic bid, but now Green Bay gets thrown into the pot of at-large bids, and they had a dominating year. Again, I'm being hypothetical, folks. But my point, Kevin, is those dominating mid-major teams that are supposed to win and get the automatic bids, they have to take care of business for a conference like the ACC and the Big Ten to get more teams in at large. Because if those mid-majors, if there's a lot of upsets, it puts more teams into the bucket. And now an 8-12 Big Ten team may lose out to a mid-major that is 25-3. And that's just reality. And so last year, I think we saw a lot of that happen. A lot of the automatic bids went to the dominating team in the mid-major. It left a lot of at-large bids out there. And there are some teams, and every year it's going to be argued, well, why didn't so-and-so get in? But once you start getting a lot of upsets in those mid-majors, that's when you start seeing teams from the ACC, the Big Ten, that are below 500 not getting the bids to the big dance. So there's a lot of things that need to happen across the country also for the Big Ten to throw in multiple teams like they did last year. But it was great to see. What else you got, my friend? I know you got to mosey on out of here.
I do. But yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. You know, there will always be upsets and bids stolen. You know, there will always be 1, 2, you know, whatever. But when there's 4, 5, 6, that's when, you know, you start getting those 2, 3, 4 teams that should have been in the tournament and they don't because, like you said, a 3-loss, you know, MEAC team loses in their conference final and ends up getting a spot, and deservingly so. I think a team like that does deserve a spot as opposed to an 8-12 Big Ten team, whether they're better or not. I think if you go 25-3 and you make your conference final and you lose by, you know, 5 points, you should get in. You had an unbelievable season. You know, you should be that 11 seed, that 12 seed in one of those play-in games, you know? So, anyway, thought you brought up a good point. But that's all I got. On the next show, we'll go over Michigan State and Purdue and Michigan and Wisconsin and Maryland and Iowa and Minnesota. Those are the top 7 teams from a year ago that all made the NCAA tournament. So that show will be a good one as well. But it's always fun doing it.
Sounds like a plan. Well, you get on out of here. You go to work, youngster. I'm going to enjoy my day off. I'm going to have my wife put me to work somewhere around this house. Actually going to get the hairs cut later today also. I'm a pretty busy man on my time off, but we will be recording another show, a lot of shows actually. Find us on Twitter at Youngster Old Man. You want to find us individually at Troy Robert 967. The Youngster is at Kid Cuddy. Hope you enjoyed the show today, everybody. We'll get back at you later. Have a good day.